Is that going to be?
Ever since its independence from British colonial rule in 1948, Sri Lanka has faced several crises. From a 26-year civil war that ended in 2009 to a series of coordinated bombings 10 years later exposing divisions. The economic perils from the previous years deepened with the COVID-19 pandemic. The island nation of 22 million suffered months of blackouts, food and fuel shortages, and galloping inflation. That triggered mass protests last year demanding the resignation of President Gotabaye Rajapakse. He was blamed for endemic mismanagement of the country's finances. Rajapakse resigned and fled the country in July 2022 after tens of thousands, raged by the economic crisis, stormed his office and residence. In a parliamentary vote, Rajapakse's Prime Minister Ranila Wickremesinghea was elected president despite his unpopularity. The new government is tasked with leading the country out of economic collapse. Help from abroad and an IMF $2.9 billion loan are seen as crucial. As China has yet to agree on the rescue package's conditions, a key player is Sri Lanka's new top diplomat, Ali Sabri. Sabri says his country can only wait until March the 31st to receive the expected financial assistance from the IMF. What might happen next for the South Asian nation? Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister Ali Sabri talks to Al Jazeera. Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka Ali Sabri, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as we know, your country desperately needs that IMF loan. Have you had any indication from the IMF that they now feel all the conditions have been met for them to release that $2.9 billion?
Actually, yes, it is true that IMF is, we are in need of the IMF loans. We have had extensive discussion, but the precondition that the Sri Lankan government need to take in terms of revenue collection and other reforms, they're happy for the progress that we have achieved. But bilateral creditors are the issues now. So India had already given the assurances to restructure the debt. Paris Club should come one of these days, and we are at the advanced level of discussion with China. So if those things are there, we probably be able to get the IMF, EFF during the first quarter of this year.
Now, we understand that the Chinese Export-Import Bank has sent Sri Lanka a letter saying, hey, we'll give you a couple of years delay on paying back loans. Do I understand correctly from what you're saying? It sounds like that's not enough for the IMF to release the loan, and you're still having to negotiate maybe other facilities from the Chinese. Is that right?
Not really any other facilities, but there are
maybe other conditions then?
Not other conditions in the sense of in terms of the loan or whatever it is, but there are still not finalized the negotiations with the Chinese, and we hope that the Chinese negotiations will also see a final end towards finalizing the
So what's
the
not
conditions.
finalized? What are you trying to work out with the Chinese so you can get that money?
Yeah, the issue right now is there is a little bit of a differences what the IMF want and what the Chinese have offered. So we need to get all of them into one table so that hopefully everybody is in the same page so that we can move on with it. So there is a little bit of work to be done yet, and we are confident that we should be able to do that.
All right, forgive me for pushing you, but I want to drill down so that we can understand what are those differences now between the Chinese and the IMF?
No, actually, those are not in public domain. So we need to sit down and discuss with them in a sense of respect for each other's perspective and views. So hopefully, once we come out with the agreement and undertaking between each other, we will come to the public domain and will share with everyone.
All right, but clearly what China has offered up until this point has not been 100% meeting what the IMF needs, right?
Yeah, it's two different perspectives. Yeah, Chinese are saying something and IMF want a different sort of an undertaking. Hopefully, we should be able to bring it.
How soon do you think this is going to take?
Sooner the possible. As you correctly pointed out in your introduction, we are desperate for it because country is desperate for it.
All right, let me put the question this way then. How long can you wait? How long can Sri Lanka wait? I mean, you're dealing with a foreign currency shortage, inflation, recession. Do you have even an approximate date in your mind by which you say to the IMF or to the Chinese or to anyone, guys, if we don't reach this point, if we don't reach the loan by this point, we're going to have serious issues in Sri Lanka again?
Yes, I think we have made it very clearly indicated that probably the first quarter of this year, before 31st of March or so, is probably the most we can wait. So hopefully we will try to get something before that.
What happens if come, God forbid, 31st of March, you still haven't worked this out? What does that mean for Sri Lanka? What does it mean for people? Queues again at gas stations? Shortages of important basic, supplies?
I don't see a danger of same thing what happened last year is immediately happening if we continue with our reforms right now, and if the people of Sri Lanka will continue to have faith on the system and continue to remit the funds through the banking channels, and tourists continue to come as they have done during the last couple of months.
If you don't get this IMF loan, though, how are you going to pay salaries? How are you going to meet your current account deficits? Where are you going to get the money from?
Yeah, no, I think we are not trying to get the IMF loan and try to pay the salaries. That, of course, we have increased our revenue basis year on year. We will probably get about 50% more than what last year in terms of the higher taxes which we are now taking on. But the problem is, on the long run, is loan services. So without we start resuming service of the loans, that is where the problem is. So then we will continue to have lack of access to the international market, and then the other projects continue to stand suspended. And as a result of which, the recovery and the growth will take time.
So you need that IMF money by the 31st of March, or you're going to have difficulty accessing loans in the international money markets. You're going to have trouble servicing your current loans and debts, right? That's what's at stake for you. All right. Well, is there anything more you would like to ask China to do in order to help speed up those talks? We know they've made an offer to try and delay the payments that you have to pay for 2 years. Is there anything you want to use this opportunity to say, could you do this as well?
No, Chinese have been our long-standing friends, and Chinese government have repeatedly said that we will not let Sri Lanka down, and they consider Sri Lanka as a special case and a long-standing friend, which we are. So we are very hopeful that they will look at it in a way. Of course, they will also have their own considerations and concerns, but eventually we are very, very confident that government of China and the people of China will stand with Sri Lanka. This reform process.
All right. How do you respond to those in Sri Lanka who say that what you're negotiating with the IMF is about to push, and is already pushing, more families into extreme economic hardship? Taxes have been raised, people are already struggling, and you're under pressure from the IMF to raise government revenues, and that's putting people in an impossible situation.
Yeah, which is true. Any deep-rooted economic reforms which are long overdue are going to cause a lot of pain, and it causing pain to everybody across the board. There's no true word about it, but this we have to endure it. But on the part of the Sri Lankans for a long period of time.
How do you tell people, though, Minister, how do you tell people to endure it when some people are saying we're skipping meals?
Yeah, so I think some sort of an exaggeration also there in particularly the international media, but it's not that bad. But yes, people are suffering naturally. If you compare to last year, when your inflation had around for about 70-80%, and now it has come down to about 60, it's always going to be painful. But the issue is, do we have any other choices other than raising revenue and getting that money? And I know it's not an easy job. We all seen that. when economic reforms take place, your government becomes very unpopular. But that's exactly what happened to Sri Lanka. Over a long, long period of time, populist policies have brought us here. So therefore, irrespective of the consequences of popularity, right decision had to be made on behalf of the country. I think people will appreciate it, not today probably, down the road.
Minister Sabri, let me read to you a number, because you said there is some misunderstanding in international media. Well, at the end of last year, in November, the World Food Programme released figures showing 32% of Sri Lankan households are now food insecure. Are you saying that that situation has changed dramatically in the last 2 months?
Not really, but the problem is sometimes
so
they also said last August
having difficulty, getting their meals together, right?
I know, I'm not denying that. People are going through very, very difficult times, and probably some sort of quarter of our population is missing their meals. But government is also trying to do whatever is possible with the support of the international community, especially. We are trying to give them some sort of a social protection net for about more than 3 million families since last May.
All right. Now, you've recently been touring countries. You went to places like Saudi Arabia, inviting investments in Colombo Port City, renewable energy projects. What kind of response are you getting from potential investors? Are people willing to invest? Are they holding back to wait and see what happens first with the IMF?
They are very, very interested in some of the areas, such as you say, the renewable energy and using Sri Lanka as an energy hub for the region, and our Trincomalee energy development project, and also the port city, as well as tourism. But as you say, serious buyers will also very closely look at it, what's happening with the IMF, so that the sense of confidence comes in. That is precisely, it's not the 2.9 billion which matters for us for on the long period of time when it comes in 3 or 4 tranches. It is about the confidence which we are building with the international community. So I would say that yes, there are a lot of interest. And there will be some workout, and some will also wait for what is happening with the IMF. That is why IMF is central for our recovery.
All right. You are a member of the SLPP, the Sri Lanka People's Front Party. Many would say in Sri Lanka it's responsible for the economic mess Sri Lanka is facing. Are they right?
I would say yes and no. It's not that simple. Sri Lanka's current troubles are based on bad debt, bad luck in terms of what happened in Ukraine, and then the energy crisis and the prices, and also 2 to 3 years of problems that we had with the COVID, and also bad policies. Yes, some of the bad
Minister,
policies...
many would point out that a lot of these problems precede either the war in Ukraine or COVID-19. They have to do with the trade imbalance, import-export trade imbalances, foreign direct investments consisting of too much loans rather than equity investments, taxation cuts. You remember those agricultural reforms and where that left the agricultural output. Poorly timed investments into non-tradable industries, not to mention corruption.
No. So some of those things are very correct and justifiable, but what I'm trying to say that these debt issues that you are talking about, it did not take place during the last 2 years during the SLPP government. Unfortunately, debt have been there for a long period of time. In fact, we have not taken any debt for any of the project during the last 3 years, unless other than we paying back the things. So therefore, yes, the bad debt for a long period of time, we have a problem. And 86% of our last year's revenue went for a large public sector. That is a problem. So a small revenue, the revenue we have comparatively, that is also a problem. These are long-standing problems. But as you say very correctly, the COVID cut off about, normally in 2018, we had $4.4 billion worth of revenue coming only from tourism. This came down to about 200 million in 2020. So therefore, it's a combination of bad luck, And the bad policies which you mentioned, coming down on taxation and not approaching the IMF at the right time, and also the overnight the reforms in the agriculture policy contributed. And then, of course, you all know what happened to the fertilizer prices, energy prices, petroleum prices, coal prices, grain prices. They all have accelerated the Sri Lankan current challenges. But yeah, it's partly true, and it's not entirely.
All right. How much responsibility do you think Gotabaye Rajapakse should bear for this, or Mahinda Rajapakse? I mean, they've been in positions of power for a while, going back beyond the last 2 or 3 years that you were talking about, right? You were a former Minister of Justice. I'm curious to know, do you think that they bear some responsibility?
I think everybody who have ruled this country since 1975, 1947, 75 years, have to bear some sort of responsibility. We have had great strides on free education, free public health system, and all those things. A lot of strides have been made in some direction, but somewhere, what you are saying, the debt crisis, as well as the problems related to our foreign direct investment and export-oriented economy had not taken place. So everybody has to bear some sort of responsibility.
Let me ask you then, do you think it was right for former President Gotabaye Rajapakse just to be allowed to leave, or should he have been investigated and face some kind of investigative judicial process? Because that was one of the demands of protesters, right?
In terms of, unless if there is evidence of any corruption or anything, people need to be investigated. But the problem with the last 2 to 3 years is not really about that you have totally, it's about the corruption or anything. Corruption had been an endemic for a long period of time in our systems, but the basic requirement,
it got worse according to Transparency International's index from 2020 to 2021, the perception of corruption at least. It wasn't getting better in the case of Sri Lanka. Its ranking was going down.
Yeah, it has been since, I mean, this has been a problem for the last 30, 40 years. It goes up and then come down and all those things. It's just not the politician itself. It's a whole lot of problem that we have.
So where is the accountability then? As a former Minister of Justice, are you bothered by that? Where is the accountability, the investigations, the trials for people associated with the greatest crisis of Sri Lanka since its independence?
Yeah, some of the people have already gone to the Supreme Court. You would have seen that recent judgment to the Supreme Court in respect of the Easter Sunday attack. Former presidents were held responsible in this country. And then we have a very independent, strong judiciary. Or similarly, there is a couple of cases are pending. And apart from that, it's about decision-making. And if there are evidence of
the Easter attacks, those are security failures, though, right?
Yeah. No, similarly, there is another case which is pending in the Supreme Court right now. Supreme Court had taken notice of the economic crisis, and probably the normal process will take place there, and all these things will be debated, who was responsible and who is responsible. And for us, it is what is important is learn from the past mistake and look ahead and reboot it. While you leave it to the judiciary and the prosecutors to do so, because if you start pointing fingers at each other, you will continue to point fingers and will not go anywhere. So that it's important while we focus on that.
Minister,
right now,
a little bit of finger pointing though is necessary if you're to establish not only accountability, but a new era of accountability for the future, and to send the message to people. I mean, I'm sure you know that as a former Minister of Justice.
Of course, it is necessary. That is precisely what I've been saying. People are looking at it, and there are elections coming here. And people have a right to choose or send the parties away from the power, and the court process is taking place. Supreme Court had already admitted a particular case to be heard, and on top of that, if there is evidence of particular corruption, and then that can be investigated, those have to take place. But we also need to be very careful. That's only one side of the story. But in the meantime, right now, what is important for us is to get back on track, and then economic recovery and the growth. This is what very important. And for that, you need to have these reforms taking place, however unpopular it is.
talking about rebooting then, you were once seen at least, this is the way you were framed, as somebody close to President Gotabaye Rajapakse. You were his Minister of Finance, although very briefly. You headed his legal team. You even campaigned for him in 2019. You urged the voters from the Muslim minority to vote for him. Do you have any regrets about that? I'm just curious to know now, after everything that's happened, how do you look back on those days, Minister Sabri?
Yeah, obviously, the manner in which he prosecuted Sri Lanka's wars in 2009 to 2014, he gave great leadership to defeat one of the most ruthless terrorist organizations in the world, which kind of give just 24 hours to the Muslims in the north and east, just 24 hours to leave. My issue was at that point in time, it is important in a country like Sri Lanka where only 10% of the Muslims live. You can't put all eggs in your one basket. It's very, very important. You see that some other countries, Muslims have been isolated and taken out of the mainstream. It is also important, if you are smart enough, for Sri Lanka to proceed together. We need to stand up together as Sri Lankans, not as Muslims, Sinhalese, Tamils, or anybody. For that to do, you need to have people in both camps. So that is precisely I did. I don't regret it. But of course, I feel disappointed that most of the dreams that we had for our country to bring Sri Lanka into the next level had not been able to achieve. Rebuilding a country is a very, very difficult thing. That's precisely our message right now. Learn from the past, get ready for governing, not only winning elections, which we have done very successfully last 75 years. Every 5 years we have had elections. Governments come, government goes, and that's our credit that democracy have thrived. Despite all the finger pointing, I feel this crisis probably an opportunity for us to do this and learn from it, and get ready for governance rather than only winning elections or defeating a party who is in power. If people want to do it's fine, but when you come, you must be ready.
Democracy and good governance, of course, relies on a functioning civil society. President Ranila Wickremesinghea, since he came to power, he's really cracked down on some of the protesters, right? He's taken quite a hard line. I'm wondering how you view that. Do you agree with that approach?
Of course, the constitutional process had taken place. The former president who was elected had decided to give up and go, and that's all taken place very peacefully. And the constitutional process have taken place, and the parliament, in terms of Sri Lankan constitution, and elected a president. And if you are elected a president, you must give him a little bit of breather for him to deliver on his promises and to get the country back on track. So some of those things, these same kind of, you would have seen that the British Prime Minister is saying that he's curbing the disruptive protest. The Canadian Prime Minister is saying that he's curbing the disruptive protest. And so nobody talks about that. Here in Sri Lanka, all in all...
But forgive me for interrupting, but the former commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Ambika Satkunanathan, she said last year, August 4th, 2022, she said, this appears to be a witch hunt. They're hunting for people with minor infractions to crush dissent, while people who are responsible for what she said, war crimes, massive corruption, bringing the country to its knees, are able to just continue as business as usual. Is she wrong?
She's partly wrong. Basically, I don't agree that we have crushed legitimate protests. Protests take place every day in Sri Lanka. People have right to do so. But the problem is when it comes to disruptive, violent, the country and the government has a responsibility to maintain the law and order. If you talk to the ordinary people, of course, different people have different perspective, but 90% of the ordinary people, you ask them what do you want? We want stability, peace, we want more tourists to come, and we want better lives. So I think the government of the day has a responsibility to restore that.
Demonstrations do continue in Sri Lanka. On January the 20th, doctors, teachers, engineers were demonstrating outside the Ministry of Finance. January 23rd, port workers protested. January 25th, central bank employees demonstrating. How worried are you that you're walking on eggshells? And if the situation doesn't get better soon, there could be a return to much wider scale protests.
Yeah, that danger is there. That's what I told, that these reforms are very painful. Unfortunately, that's how it is all over the world. When the taxes were brought down, nobody said that, no, you are bringing it down too much. I will pay the amount, but you are bringing it down to the state coffers so that you will have a better sustainable economy. No one did say. But now that they have to pay, the thinking like is that austerity is important, restructuring is important, payment of tax is important, but don't touch me. So that's the problem. That is the problem had been for a long period of time. But do we have a choice? If we have a better choice, no politician would want to do it. All the politicians want to be popular. But that populist policies have brought our country down to this level today.
Why do you do it then? Minister, I want to ask you this on a personal level. Why do you do this job?
Yeah, so that precisely, as a Sri Lankan who loved my country, who had deep feeling for my country, this is the most difficult times. You have two choices. You can continue to curse the darkness, or you can just try to briefly light a lamp or a candle. So I am here to the best of my ability to put things right, work hard, and bring back some sort of normalcy.
Ali Sabri, the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.